Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast. Topic today is configuring Data Wizard to automate project legends. We're going to look behind the scenes at some of the settings to make Data Wizard work in Civil 3D. My name is Brian Lewandowski. I'm the Civil Product Manager at CTC, and I'll be giving the presentation today. So just a recap on Data Wizard, we do have some other detailed webcasts on how to use Data Wizard from an end user standpoint. This one is more about configuring it for legends, but just to give you a background on what the Data Wizard is, it's about creating drawing-specific legends or detailed quantity takeoffs. What it does is it will scan one or more drawings for any number of AutoCAD or Civil 3D point, line, or area objects and generate legends for you. You can save out templates for different legend types or different QTO types, so you can quickly reuse them with all your settings specified within. So some big time savings there. Data Wizard comes with three primary tools. One is the full wizard, which is called the Setup Legend. The second one is the Legend from Template command, and that just reads a Data Wizard template file and then generates a legend or a QTO, whatever you're creating from that. And then the Update Legend command, this is if you've already generated a legend and some information in your drawing changed, you want to refresh that. You can go ahead and do that with that command. So how does Data Wizard work? At a high level, you start using the full wizard and you choose your drawing sources. So you can do current drawing, you can do X references, you can do additional drawings. You can also limit to a particular layout or a viewport to do very sheet-specific legends. In the next page of the wizard, you choose your objects. So here's a list of all the objects that we can scan for and quantify or tabulate within our drawings. So I choose which ones. And then from those objects themselves, what data am I going to display? I've got a full list of information I can pull the graphic through. That would be a symbolic representation of the object itself, something I would show in a legend. And then I've got layer description, all kinds of different information, some of it quantity based, some of it just attribute data that I might show in my legend or my QTO reports or tables, so on and so forth. I can even put a custom description in where I manually type in the data to show up. And then finally, you choose the output. So I've scanned these drawings, I've decided what objects I want to look for and what data I want to pull from those objects, and then finally, what I want it to look like. I've got all kinds of formatting options. I can sort my columns and categories differently, and then I can push all this out to Excel or to an AutoCAD table. So that's the gist of it. And the result is, a legend, something like this. This is an existing conditions legend. And it's very much based on the drawing standards in your templates. And that's an important piece of it, these legends, and that's the focus of today. We generate an AutoCAD table, but it's all your block definitions, your line types, hatch patterns, layer and style properties. That's all the information that we're automatically pulling with Data Wizard to generate these legends or these QTOs. So it's important how those standards are set up, really more so than ever before, because oftentimes things like layer descriptions, that was just helpful information for the end user. Well, now that could be information that's used to generate a legend, or maybe it's the style description. I could pull that information through as well. So how do you configure this? How do we make this work for you in your organization? I'm going to step through the basic steps here, and then we're going to jump into the software and dive in detail for each one of these key steps here. So the first one is to define a legend text source. What I mean by that, here's a sample of a legend. This information, right, what property of the objects am I going to read from to auto-populate that legend? It needs to be common across all the objects for a given legend type. So the example we're going to do today is a existing conditions legend, and I'm going to read survey points, survey figures, and hatches. Now I need to pull information that's common across all of those. Now some of those are Civil 3D objects, some are base AutoCAD objects. So what's common across those? Layer description is a good example. And I actually want to highlight the use of the CTC CIM Manager Suite, the Layer Boss. If we're going through and tweaking layer descriptions, a great tool is the Layer Boss to allow me to export this to Excel, easily update those layer descriptions, and then sync them back to my template. Obviously, we can do it right in Layer Manager. Excel is just a much faster way to do it. So that's from the CTC CIM Manager Suite. The next step is to adjust the graphics definitions, right? So if I'm showing symbology within my legend here, how that shows up really depends on my block definitions. Okay, so I might have to be in block editor to adjust the size of something. If it's a point, a Cogo point or a survey point, some of the scaling options and the point style make a difference. And then if I have a description key set, assigning styles to those points, for example, any scaling parameters that I might have in use would also affect the appearance of this. I'm going to show this use case specifically in Civil 3D and how that plays out if you are using this, because you might have different points of different sizes. It doesn't necessarily mean you want that object to show up for each and every row in the AutoCAD table. And then other things like line objects or hatch objects, how those are defined in your standards, those come right through to the legend itself. So if you've got some line types you want to change, again, I recommend using the CTC CIM Manager Suite. The Line Type Manager is something that allows you to graphically edit line types if they're not quite showing up the way you want to. You get this nice interface and a graphical preview down here as you are editing that line type. So moving on, you have to create a table style for paper and or model space. If you're going to generate your legends in paper space, the settings within an AutoCAD table style are different than those if you were generating a model space table. You have to build out legend templates. I shouldn't say you have to, but it's highly recommended. Within the Data Wizard setup, there are a lot of settings you can specify, from the object type to the data that you're going to pull from those objects, and then even some detailed filtering options so that it pulls certain types of points or certain types of hatches, but not others, for example. All those settings save to a Data Wizard template file, just like this here, that we can save out. It's a simple text-based file, and those can be easily loaded in the future. So making this work for you is to get some of this stuff set up in your templates. Most people's templates are mostly ready to go, but you might want to make a few tweaks that I'm mentioning here, and then to build out some of these Data Wizard templates so that all your users can easily take advantage of this. And finally, and I'll show you this live today, test and tweak until you get the desired results. Exact spacing around hatching, the appearance of the text, size of symbology, all that kind of stuff. It's really easy to kind of make tweaks in your drawing and then refresh the table to see that it's generating the legend as you wish it to. And then finally, you want to educate users on this new workflow. What we're attempting to do with Data Wizard for Legends is to bring some real time savings in generating these legends and some real accuracy improvements. A lot of times people are bringing in just standard one-size-fits-all type legends for their sheets They might be showing objects that are not in the drawing, or vice versa, and even worse, not showing objects that do exist in those project drawings. Data Wizard solves all that by scanning for exactly what's in the drawing and what you wish to show, and to put that into an AutoCAD table. So we're going to jump back and forth. I'm going to go to that first step here, which is to define a legend text source common across objects for a given legend type. I'm going to show you a couple options on this so you get a good feel for how we can work with our data. So here is a drawing. I'm going to generate a legend right here on the side of my sheet. So if I go to the CIM Project Suite, this is where I can access Data Wizard. And what I have in this drawing are some survey points, some survey figures, and some hatching for different features. And so I want to generate a legend for that. Now I want my legend to say something like turf or concrete pavement or something like that. And I don't want to have to manually type that stuff, so there's places I can put this in my templates and in my drawings. So let's go ahead and launch Setup Wizard. And here's that first screen where we choose our drawing sources. We're going to do the current drawing, and we're going to limit to the Site Plan 1 layout. And I'm going to make sure I've got the right viewport here. A little thing to note about configuring Data Wizard. The viewport reference will be unique for each project. So this isn't a setting that would, be the same for every project. So as users load a template right at the top here to generate a legend, they will have to specify their exact viewport. So I hit Next. Here I have all those options for the different objects. Again, we're picking survey points, survey figures, and hatches. And if I hit Refresh, it'll show me the objects that I have here, the total items and then the filtered items. I don't have any filters yet, but one I can do right off the bat is to exclude layers that are frozen. And when I do that, the filtered items list goes down. So as I'm doing this, all these things save to this template that I can click and save out at any point. But what we're focused on here is the information that I'm going to show in my legend. So if I expand survey points, what I've got showing up, what's going to be in my legend, is the graphic column, so that's some kind of symbolic representation, and then the layer description. So this information is being pulled from the layers that these objects reside on. Now there's all kinds of other sources I can pull from, and you can choose what works best for you, but as I said, you want to choose something that's common across all your object types for that given legend. So I could turn on style description, for example, perhaps hatch pattern. Let's hit OK to this. So for my survey points, I have some of the similar kind of descriptions in the point styles. Obviously, hatch pattern is not a property of a survey point. For survey figures, I've got some similar figure style descriptions showing up here. But of course, for hatches, I don't have a style. There isn't a Civil 3D style associated with that. There's a hatch pattern, right? So I need to pick something common. And so a real a recommended property to use is layer description, but I'll show you how to do both, layer description or perhaps style description, to generate these legends. So if we go and turn this off, let's first use the case of pulling layer description from these objects. And when I see that, that shows up. Now you note there's a few things that are duplicates in here, like these trees are showing up multiple times because they have different diameters. All these settings that we specify in Data Wizard and then eventually save out to a template are important to account for things like this. So what I want to do is to be able to tell it in the weeding column to weed out anything that or anything that starts with TRD, consider that just one object. And part of setting this up is to put in the other raw descriptions we know that might have unique full descriptions, or raw descriptions rather, but that we want to treat as the same object. So if I hit OK to this, you'll see those filtered items go down. The survey figures, I want to differentiate and say that I only want survey figures whose layers have the word line in them, somewhere in their layer name. So I hit OK to that, and I hit Next. And now we see under survey points, those objects starting to trim down under survey figures. Okay. Now let's go ahead and generate this legend. We'll be back in the Data Wizard legend many times, but I want to focus on the data that we're pulling from here. So I'll hit Next and accept some of these default formatting options. Hit Finish and drop this right here. So the layer description is what I'm pulling. That's what's showing up right here. In fact, I'll even show you, as we change any of these layer descriptions, like perhaps it shouldn't be just concrete, but I want it to say concrete pavement. If I go to that layer and change that description, maybe the curb and gutter should say concrete curb and gutter. If I simply run my update legend command now, this is going to rescan the drawing using all the same settings I just specified. And now I've got concrete pavement showing up. I've got concrete curb and gutter. Okay. So the source of your information is important. When you're scanning for both AutoCAD and Civil 3D objects, it's going to be something common like layer name, layer description, something like that that you can use to populate your legend. Let's show another case where perhaps we're not doing the legends where we include hatching. We don't show any hatching. It's just maybe survey points and survey figures, just the line work. So let's show another way to build this legend from a different source of information. So I'll hit Next. This time we'll turn off hatches. I'll hit Next again. And now instead of layer description, let's go in and grab style description and turn layer description off. Let's use that source. Now a preview shows up for those point and figure objects. I'll hit Finish and I'll drop this in right here. Okay. So this is reading from what? For the points, it's reading from our point styles over here. So if I go to my CB or my catch basin point style, right there, that data is being pulled. Maybe I didn't want catch basin, but instead wanted storm inlet. So for that point style, and then going down here to the figure styles, maybe my curb, I told it to read style description. I could do style name, but we said we wanted that more detailed description, so I can put that in here. Now if I run an update legend command on this newly created table, I hit OK, and that's refreshing. So it shows concrete curb and gutter, it shows concrete pavement. So really easy to do this. Like I said, we're taking advantage of information that you normally wouldn't have cared that much about. Who cares about style descriptions that much? It might be helpful information in sorting through and setting up your styles, but it didn't play a role in plan production. Data Wizard takes advantage of this. It makes the data in your objects, in your drawings, that much more valuable because it contributes to directly generating these legends and tables. Let's look at another example, a different data source I could use. Now a lot of the objects, maybe point or line objects, things like styles or layer information, that's going to be the place you go to populate your legends. But what if we have something like this? We can scan for M leaders, multi-leaders, and we can pull attribute information. So if I zoom into here and I double click on this, what you'll see is there's two attributes in this callout type MLeader. There's the tag number, which is the number showing up, and then there's just a description, which is something I've typed in there. Okay, so we can reference that in our legend. So if you've got all sorts of different callouts or keynotes like this, we can automatically populate all those based on the attribute information inside those objects. Now it's going to treat these uniquely if they have a different value in here. So both of these say 4-inch asphalted concrete. If one was different and it had a different value to it, perhaps this is 5 and it's 6-inch asphalted concrete, we'll see that show up differently in our legend. So let's take a look at that, see how this works. And then we'll dive into those block definitions a little bit so you understand how those are configured so that you can generate keynote legends like this. So I'll run setup legend. I'm going to limit this to this viewport right here. A thing to note is that the viewport also governs how the symbology scales in your legend. So if it's a paper space legend, it's important for you to pick the viewport. We're looking at multi-leaders. If I go in and refresh this, you'll see that we've got 7 showing up. I'll hit next. And if I expand this, what kind of information do we want to pull from that? Okay, there is all kinds of information. Again, it could be layer description, but maybe that's not the most valuable here. Like we said, what about block attribute information in those MLeaders? So I'm going to turn on this additional data, and then this shows up here, and I can dive into here and instruct it to pull the description field from those MLeaders. And if I hit next again, we'll see the full preview, and we'll see that information come through. So there's that 4-inch asphalted concrete, 6-inch asphalted concrete. Another one of the callouts has the description attribute is set up as drainage manhole. So let's hit finish to this and drop this right in here. And there is our keynote legend. Now some of these aren't showing up because we don't have attributes in there, but then some of these, they are showing up because we did populate the description field. So I want to show you a couple things. One, how these tables are smart. You know how we went in here and we changed this to be a different definition. Say it was the same one. Well, in that case, you wouldn't really want it to table it twice, right? If those are the exact same definitions, just different locations on the sheet. Data Wizard is smart enough to know that those are the same type of callout. And so if I hit a refresh, it'll just go back down to that one callout. So what do these look like? What do we have to put inside of those callouts in order for this attribute information to be able to come through? Well, let's dive into this number 3. Number 3 is calling out a sanitary manhole. So if I run the block edit command and I go into my block known as underscore tag box, that's the block being referenced in the MLeader style. Those of you who aren't familiar with it, if you look at your MLeader styles, you can define, here's that square. Right in the content, you can define the multi-leader type as a block. mtext is where you just have a little mtext entity, but a block is what we're talking about here. And if it's a block, we can then have attributes in it. We can do all kinds of nice things in terms of tabulating that information. So back to that block editor. I edit that block, and then I come right up here and I add an attribute definition. And we'll put this same as the other ones. We want to grab the, or have a description field. And then unless you want it to show up in plan view in the viewport itself, you want to check on invisible so it's not there. But nevertheless, the data is still inside the MLeader object so that we can tabulate it. So I'll hit OK and drop this right here. Now, some of this formatting might not be quite right, so I'll just run a match properties to match formatting of this to this one. Just move that down there. Okay, and it doesn't really matter where I put it because it's not showing up. It's just going to be tabulated. So now if I double click on this, a description field shows up, a description attribute, and now I can populate that with information. Okay, now I can have these things preloaded and ready to go. I can pull them from the tool palettes, all kinds of different things where I already have this information populated. Or if I have the attributes filled out as I wish, I can just go and copy these around to generate a different one. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Actually, I'm going to delete this one. I'm going to make a copy of this because I already filled out the attribute information. Okay, simple as that. If I come back to my legend, we're already picking up that square number 3 keynote. I just simply need to refresh so that it reads that information. There it is, sanitary sewer manhole shows up down here. Now what's important to note, that attribute name description, it needs to be the exact same in each of the different block types. So right in here, it's called description, not shorthand DESC or something like that. It's the full word description, and the same thing right here. And that's important because when we go into our setup legend command and we're pulling through this additional data, if I have one of the description attributes named description and the other one some kind of abbreviated version, I'm going to get multiple attributes in here. So make sure you name them the same when you're tabulating block attributes or MLeader callout attributes in this way. So for this other one, I would just simply have to add the attribute information there, and it would come through. So lots of different ways to pull data. These are just a few of the examples, but what I recommend is most of the time it's going to be perhaps a layer description or a style description that you pull from your data to populate your legends. Okay, that was the first step. It's an important piece of it because without that information correctly entered into our content, our templates, we're not able to populate these legends automatically. So let's look at the next step here, which is to be adjusting these graphics definitions. Now, Data Wizard is smart, and when you, for example, pick a viewport, it will scale those objects to match exactly how they show up in the viewport. But you have to have that symbology showing up the way you wish in the first place. Now, most people, legends or your templates are pretty good to go. You like the size of your points, the way the line types work. But you may find you want to adjust some of this when we're using those exact definitions to generate these legends. So let's take a look at that. So how does it know what size to make for this right here? In fact, if I take this catch basin and I drag it right over here, it's working as we expected. It's the exact same size as the one in the viewport. So it knows to do that based on how it shows up in this viewport. But it's all based on the point style itself, right? So how you're setting this in the first place, right here on the marker tab, if this was a little bit larger from point 2 to point 3, okay, if I hit OK to that, you'll notice that that gets a little bit larger. Now the size isn't quite right. What Data Wizard is doing is embedding blocks within the AutoCAD table And so we simply need to refresh the table for it to rescan and update the size. Oh, that's bigger, matches that size. Same thing with the signage. If perhaps that's too big, you don't want that, just go change the sign size in there, and that'll be reflected. Obviously, the block definition itself plays a role. So in a point style, this is just a multiplication factor times the size of the block in the first place. So you could go and you could manipulate the size of your block, or you could change it here, and that obviously affects how it shows up in model space. But Data Wizard will just take whatever you have defined and place it there accordingly. Now, what about these trees? This is kind of a unique scenario where we have point objects where a diameter was entered in addition to the point code. And that diameter is then being used in my description key set. If I open that up, for those tree symbols, it's then being used to scale the size of it. And that's how we get this nice behavior where different tree symbols are smaller or larger depending on the diameter typed in. So there's a 6-inch, there's a 10-inch. Okay. What Data Wizard will do is it ignores the scaling done by that parameter. And so it's going to take it how it would show up if you didn't put in any kind of diameter in your description. So if this is showing up a little small, how do you work with that? Well, it goes like this. We first have to go to the point style, go to that tree, and then increase this. Let's go to 0.3 perhaps. Hit OK. Now it's going to make these a lot bigger, but first let's go update your legend. Hit OK to that. And now we're getting a tree symbol that's more the size we want. But now these are too big. If you remember what I said, the scale factor in the description key set is ignored by Data Wizard. So you can increase the point style, which will affect the point style scale factor right in here, which will affect Data Wizard legends. And then you can decrease the scale factor in your description key set. You'll get the same effect in your drawing, but you'll get legends showing up the way you want. So let's go in here. We had increased the scale factor in the point style by 3, so we need to decrease this by the same factor, so dividing by 3. So change that to 0.3. Okay, if I go to, let's go to our point groups and apply that change to my trees. So apply those description keys. And now you see those scale back to the original size, and my legend is still the correct size. So all kinds of little tricks we can do there. What about some other things? What about the lines? Okay, the lines, pretty straightforward. The line types are going to match what you have in this viewport. If you change your LT scale, for example, it should be kept at 1, but say it was at something different, at 2. It changes in the legends just as it does in your viewport. What about the length of the line? And what about the size of the hatch sample in the first place? Okay, unlike point symbols or block symbols, there's a finite definition of it, but a hatch or a line there's no really finite size to it. So there's a sample size that you define when you create this legend. Let's go and launch Data Wizard again so I can show you how some of these settings on the final page affect the legend output. So right here, the graphics cell size, minimum width of 3, a minimum height of 0.5. Okay. For line type objects, the width affects the size of the line itself, that line sample. Hatches, those are area objects, so the width and the minimum height are what define the hatch sample size. So maybe looking at that, it's perhaps a little too wide, and I don't need to go to 3, I'll go to 2. Maybe I can even get a little bit skinnier on the height of the hatch sample. So I'll hit finish to this, and I'll drop this right here, and we'll see that difference in this legend versus the other one. A little bit smaller hatch sample, both in width and in height, and then the line sample is smaller as well. So when you're generating a paper space legend, it works quite well. But what if you're doing it in model space? Well, you're not picking a viewport in this way. And so now you have to tell it what to scale to. So let me just run this one so you get a sense of how it will work. We're not going to limit this to any particular layout. But now these scale factors right here start to come into play. Now if you're, again, doing a paper space one, you can leave these at 1. Or if you choose, you can do some overriding scale factors on them. But they should work at 1 so long as you're doing that paper space legend and selecting that viewport. But if I'm doing a model space one, it doesn't just default to your current model space scale, because that might be different than what you show in your sheet ultimately. So we have to simply tell it what we want it to scale to. So if I set this to 20, that should work for my symbols. And then for scaling the line types and the hatches, we want to leave that at 1, because that's not the size of the object, but rather the frequency of the pattern, of the line type pattern or the hatch pattern. Okay. We also need a much bigger sample size because it's in model space. So we'll bump these up to 20 and 5. And then my AutoCAD table style, which we'll talk more about in a bit, I need to use one that works for model space. Just some different settings in there. So I'll hit finish to this. If I drop this legend in here, looks like I needed to filter some objects, but you get the idea. Right? So I can generate model space or paper space legends. I just need to be aware of the scale that I set. So if I take that sign and we compare those, we're getting the same size because I specified a symbol scale factor of 20 in Data Wizard, and my current drawing scale is 20. So I recommend doing the paper space, but it still handles model space as well. Let's move on to the table style options. These are pretty straightforward, but I want to take a peek at them so you understand how they look. So what we're generating here is simply an AutoCAD table. They function just like any other AutoCAD table. There's no proprietary object types that we're generating here, but it's what we use to populate our legend. It's how we show our legend. So I can go to the Annotate tab up here and go to my table styles. And if I take a look at the PS, or the paper space legend style, I can modify that. And some of the values that play a role in here, well, the text size right here, 0.1, that's set accordingly right there. And this is for the data cell style. But I also have headers. That's set at 0.15. I don't have those turned on in mine, but I could if I wish to. And then you have the title as well. Okay, the hatch samples. What's that little buffer or that margin there? Okay, if I set the cell style to data coming here, here's those margins. Perhaps I wanted that a little bit bigger. Let's bump those, let's double those. And maybe even my text I want set to, instead of middle center, I want it to middle left. My text and basically the justification of these cells. So let's hit OK to this. Let's close out, and you'll see I now have bigger margins. Everything is left justified. Okay. Maybe you want your graphics column to be center justified and this to be left justified. Okay, the way the Civil 3D or the AutoCAD table styles work is it formats all the data type cells at once. So you would just come in here and change this to something different if you wanted that to be centered. So it is an AutoCAD table. You can do any kind of overrides after the fact. Just know that if you run an update table, any of those overrides will be refreshed and removed. So try to let the table style and Data Wizard spit out exactly what you want. Now if I had a model space legend, I could make a very small legend in model space, but what would be more common is that I want to take a different style, a table style like this, and I want to bump up. So here the legend or the margins are 5 times the size. The text height is at 2 instead of 0.1. Okay. So different table styles for different use cases. Shouldn't need more than a couple of them to cover your bases. Let's move on and let's talk more about these legend templates. I've mentioned them a little bit. We've done some filtering to trim down the type of points that come through in our legend. But let's talk a little bit more about those and how you would create those, because this is what you want to do, and this is what you want to provide to all the users at your organization, so that when they're generating existing conditions legends or a keynote legends or legend or a demo or a grading plan legend, they can just select from the Data Wizard template that's appropriate for that sheet type, and almost all their settings will be set for them. So let's jump back here. Let's delete these again, and let's make sure we have our legend defined the way we want. So I want to limit this to this layout. Make sure I've got the right viewport. Okay, it's just the current drawing. And then let's verify I get the right information coming through. It does appear to be so. But in these filters, right, we need to think about that a little more. It's not just what works for this sheet, but it's what is needed for any kind of existing condition sheet. There is no sanitary in this sheet, okay, but I need to account for that in my Data Wizard template so that in another project, if that information does show up, it's there. Okay, so any kind of layer filtering or layer description filtering you need to put in there. And you need to put in more raw descriptions here if there's some weeding to be done because you have unique, perhaps, notes or diameter information after codes for, say, trees or structures. So I've got CD and storm drain manhole. Maybe there's sanitary sewer manhole that I need to put in here as well. Maybe a water main manhole. Okay, we want to push or put all that stuff into the filters here, fill that out, so when we save this legend template for existing sheets, it'll all be in there. It'll only apply if those actual point types are there, but I think you get the idea. So we want to populate all that information. Everything up here will save to the template as well. Make sure that's set appropriately. The data that you're extracting, this will save to the template. Make sure you have that set up properly. And then finally, the formatting right here. So the last time I ran this, it was a model space one. So set this back to 1. Set these to the appropriate sizes we want. I believe I had this at maybe 2 and 0.4. And we didn't do it before, but let's say we wanted a legend title there. I could turn that on. And then finally, how you export this, it needs to go to that paper space AutoCAD table style. Maybe I want everything uppercase instead of the title case like we had before. So regardless of how that layer description information is typed in your layers, I can set this to uppercase and just force everything to uppercase. So that exact formatting can be replicated over and over. So let's hit finish, drop our legend in here. It's looking great. I've got my all caps. That left justification, my table style is there. Now let's go replicate this on this sheet. It'll be the same for any other project. I can run the legend from template command, which allows me to go out and browse to a template. But I have a different viewport to select, so I want to run the full setup legend. And so it'd be right here, right off the bat. This is where we'd browse out to a Data Wizard template file. So how do you create them in the first place? Well, back when I was generating this one, before we closed out of it, we simply need to have saved this template. So I can do this right here because it's remembering my previous settings. Call this existing conditions legend. And close out of that. I can go to this other site plan now, run setup legend, and then simply browse to that existing conditions legend. That's the file I just exported. Okay, simple text file that saves all those settings. Go ahead and open that, and now it sets everything the way I had it. Now Data Wizard will remember your previous settings for a given drawing. But let's say I was in an entirely new project, it's not going to remember all that stuff, so that's why I want to load those templates. I might have a couple changes here, right, like a different layout and a different viewport. But everything else is the same. So all these filters that I put in there, those are all in place. The information I want to extract from my drawing is there. And then the formatting, 2.4, the AutoCAD table style, all that stuff saves in that template. So I can hit finish here and generate my legend for this sheet. Now it looks like I might have missed one thing in my filter. It's pulling through this point here. And this is kind of the tweaking and updating you need to do. So if I look at my layer list, I take advantage of some layer prefixing. So plotting points are a V- symbol layer. Non-plotting points are a V node layer. Now maybe I did want that to show up in my sheet, or maybe I don't and I can just freeze it. But maybe I want to show that elevation, but it's not something I want to show on my legend. So I can take advantage of my layer filter, my layer naming, to strip that out. So if we go through this one more time, and I go into my survey points and I tell it to use only objects whose layer has SYMB in it, I hit OK to this, hit next, save out my template again because I adjusted this a little bit. So overwrite that old one. Go ahead and tell it to replace it, and hit finish and drop that new legend in there. And now that one point shot is not showing up in there. So that's kind of the process you need to go through. Testing and tweaking that stuff just as I had done to get the desired result. And then once you get those templates built, you need to go and educate your users on this new workflow. It's really quite easy. It's not like teaching them a whole new application or tool set. It's pretty simple to do. If those in kind of the CAD manager roles just take a little bit of time and make sure things like layer descriptions or style descriptions are in place, Data Wizard will do all the work for you. So just in summary, how does Data Wizard for legend creation work? It's based on the standards in your organization's templates, in those DWTs that you're generating your drawings from. So if you've got messy standards, now's the time to clean them up a little bit to take advantage of Data Wizard. You want to be consistent in those standards, right? If you're going to use layer description as a source, or maybe style description as a source for populating legends, do that across all your objects so that you can have that single column where layer description is read from multiple object types. And then build out data wizard templates for different sheet types. I showed a couple here: a keynote legend, an existing conditions sheet, but we could generate them for all kinds of other object types. You might have an overall project legend where you're showing all kinds of information in there. In the first page of Data Wizard, we can add additional drawings, so you could scan 6 or 7 different project base files and generate one master legend based on exactly what's in that project. That would be a different template you could build out for that type of legend. And then once you've got this mastered, start implementing Data Wizard for QTO workflows. It's the same concept. We're reading objects in our drawings, telling it which data to pull from those objects, and instead just putting it out to Excel for QTO workflows, where we could go in and, if we want to do engineers' estimates, put in unit pricing, so on and so forth. Thanks a lot for watching.